Hi, my name is Lila and I'm the Mini Witch. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this week's video, we're going over everything you need to know to go from beginner to an advanced painter. This video is a step-by-step guide of me painting my miniatures from the beginning with the goal of getting you to be an advanced painter. This video assumes that you have some experience painting. You have paint, paintbrushes, models, and have a few painted models under your belt. For this reason, I will be skipping the absolute basics and instead will be focusing on techniques and painting theory. Depending on your model, you might want to do a digital mock-up of your miniature first. I especially recommend this if you are a new painter. A digital mock-up will allow you to test color schemes, including using contrasting colors in the highlights and shadows and other advanced techniques I'll talk about later. You can watch a tutorial on creating a digital mock-up online for free here. Prepping this model for paint. What you will need: your model, an X-Acto blade, a file, sandpaper, paintbrush, toothbrush, and primer. The model I'm painting today is Marin, Elf Thief from Reaper Miniatures. She is my miniature for a new D&D game I'm a part of. Obviously, this model doesn't require assembly, but I will be doing a lot of customization. For a video on assembly, you can check out this video here. First, it's time to remove the mold lines. I use an X-Acto blade and cut them away. Depending on how smooth I was able to cut them, I then use a file and sand down the mold lines even further. You should also smooth these areas with sandpaper, but we'll talk about that later. On this miniature, I'm doing some customization. Any miniature can be customized. Whether you're removing things like I'm doing here, building new pieces with green stuff, purposefully not attaching parts, or kit bashing. You are not limited to whatever came in the original package, so do what you want to do. For this reason, I keep all of the little bits and bobs I cut off my miniatures off to the side. You never know what inspiration might strike, so keep everything just in case. Marin came with 2 swords, whereas my character is more closely aligned to a monk class. For this reason, I am cutting the swords off, using an X-Acto blade on a cutting mat, slicing into one side and then the other, bending the sword until they broke off. If you don't have a cutting mat, a piece of cardboard can work just as well. After I remove the swords, I filed down the rough edges with a file. She also came with this little overcloak thing that I don't like. I'm going to be removing it with my trusty X-Acto blade, slowly slicing away thin layers until it is fully removed. Attempting to remove large chunks can be dangerous, so move forward slowly and with caution. Once the cloak is removed, I sand the area smooth with my file and sandpaper. Remember that you can always remove more later if you need to. Though you can also build areas back up with green stuff, I would prefer to work more cautiously in the beginning than regret it later. These files are by Army Painter and come in a variety of shapes. These different shapes make sanding a lot easier, so I definitely recommend having a variety of files on hand. These files tend to leave sanding marks, so take some sandpaper and sand until the surface is smooth. This model is pewter, but most of the techniques can be applied to resin and plastic models as well. The only caveat is that I do not recommend using a file on soft resin models, as it can gouge into the material. Instead, try hitting such material with more sandpaper. From here, I use a damp brush and wipe away the excess metal shavings. Then I wash the miniature with warm water and a toothbrush. Releasing agents from the molds and oils from your skin can make paint less likely to properly adhere to your miniature. Now you want to put your miniature on a grip to avoid oils from your fingers once again mucking with your paint. I've attached my miniature using blue poster tack. Ouch! This hobby holder is from Game Envy, but other brands also exist. You can use medicine bottles, hunks of wood, or whatever else is comfortable to grip. Then it's on to priming. I'm using Stynal Res from Badger Air. Usually I airbrush this on and then go on to zenithal highlighting, but for this video I'm brushing it on and skipping zenithal priming. Zenithal highlighting is a type of priming done with black and white paint that better illustrates the form and texture of your miniatures. Cardamom! Hey, hey, hey! The white paint acts as your light source and illustrates how light would hit your model. If you don't have an airbrush, you can also achieve the same— Cardamom Shabby! I'm babysitting both cats at the moment, so there is extra chaos in this video. If you don't have an airbrush, you can also achieve this effect with spray paint. I will not be doing zenithal highlighting in this video because I don't like the idea of people thinking that you need to do zenithal highlighting to be a better painter. After I've applied my primer, I double check my miniature for mold lines I might have missed. Because this model is pewter, the reflectiveness can sometimes lead to me missing mold lines. So double check your work and remove any mold lines you find. On this model, I found that there was still raised area of the cloak. So I resanded and cut away more pewter, attempting to shave it down till it looked like a jacket. Remember, you can't just fix things with paint later. If something is wrong with the priming or basing, it's probably going to show up in the end. So just go ahead and fix it now. At this point, I cut away too much or sanded too much and ended up needing to go back in with green stuff to smooth out her bodice. Green stuff is an epoxy putty often used in miniature painting. Commonly, it is used to fill gaps and cracks like what I'm doing here. Generally done before priming, of course. It can also be used to sculpt on extra elements like I did on this model here. Here you can see I sculpted on horns, a fur trim, and a small satchel. Green stuff comes in two parts, a yellow and a blue. Mix the two parts equally until they become green. For filling mold lines or smoothing out surfaces like I'm doing here, place a small piece of green stuff wherever you want it and take a damp tool to smooth it out. You could use a brush, your finger, or a silicone sculpting tool like what I'm using. Green stuff can be incredibly sticky and a pain in the butt to work with, but the secret is wetting your tools and your work area. I bought a small ceramic tile that I use as a surface when I want to sculpt things off of the model. I could do an entire video on green stuff, and if you would like that, comment down below and let me know. Otherwise, there are other tutorials on how to use green stuff and avoid unnecessary frustration. Once I smooth out the green stuff, I let it dry overnight and reprime my figure. Painting. What you'll need: paint, brushes, wet palette, thinning agent, washes, and inks. For brushes, my favorite are the Winsor Newton 1 and 0. I prefer sable hair brushes because synthetic brushes tend to curve over time, where my sable hair brushes last for months and perhaps years if you take good care of them. I'll be using paint from my own collection on this model, but a fair question for beginners is, where and how do I start my own paint collection? The brands I recommend most are Scale 75, Reaper, and Vallejo. Citadel paints tend to be very thick and can be difficult to work with. Army Painter paint can be unpredictable. You'll also want to add washes to your arsenal, and personally, I love inks and can't believe I work so long without them. But they are more advanced and can definitely wait till later on in your painting journey. When it comes to painting, I recommend using a wet palette. This is the Everlasting Wet Palette from Redgrass Games, but you don't need anything this fancy to start with. A wet palette is designed to keep your paint wet and working for longer, allowing more time for painting and less time attempting to remember the exact ratio of paints you use to get the perfect color and consistency. If you're not in the market to buy more painting equipment, you can make your own wet palette with a Tupperware container, paper towels, or a sponge and parchment paper. Plug DIY wet palette into YouTube or Google and you'll find a tutorial for what you need. We are finally on to painting! Theory. Well, okay, I lied. Before you start painting, there are 3 things you should consider, and that is light, atmosphere/color, and contrast. Now you might say, seriously, in a beginner video? But absolutely! Let me break it down as quickly as possible. Lighting is simple. All you need to do is decide where your light is coming from. You don't need to worry about OSL or anything, just in general, what is the lighting? My default neutral atmosphere is an overcast day where the lighting is diffuse and coming from above. I don't need to worry about intense shadows or color temperature, but recognizing that my light is coming from above will help tell me where the shadows and highlights should be on my model. This is especially important if you did not do zenithal highlighting. Second is atmosphere and color. Colors have meanings and can be used to tell a story. Imagine trying to paint a cheerful spring fairy scene while using only desaturated blues and purples. It's not going to work well. Consider the tone of your miniature and colors to match. Third is contrast. Contrast is what makes your model eye-catching and interesting. Contrast can be achieved in many ways, but the most common is color and value. I'll talk more about color later, but I want to talk about value here. Value is the lightness and darkness of your color, and your eyes are automatically drawn to the lightest part of a scene. Therefore, use this to your advantage and make whatever area is most important the lightest, and the less interesting areas darker. Areas I like to draw attention to are the face, weapons, armor, or whatever my model is holding. Okay, now on to painting. The paints I'm using are Surfer Orc Flesh, Boreal Green, Red Brick, White Sands, Ishtar Pink, Brown Leather, Matte White, Cloudy Gray, and Black. First things first, we need to talk about paint consistency. Thick paint obscures details on your miniature. It can also lead to texture buildup, which we obviously don't want. Every paint brand has a different consistency, and sometimes it even varies in between colors. This can be further muddled by what you plan to do with the paint. Layering, glazing, and dry brushing all require different consistencies for your paint. Since all paint brands have different viscosities, there are no hard and fast ratios of thinning paint. I use Vallejo thinner and glaze medium to thin my paints, but you can also use water. The more important thing is to learn what each type of paint should look like by testing it on the back of your hand. The goal of layering and glaze consistency is for the paint to flow off your brush with the lightest of touches. You don't want it pooling off. Imagine it more like the stroke of a quill and ink. Here you can see how I mix layer consistency and what it looks like on the back of my hand versus a glaze. You also need to consider the amount of liquid in your brush. Painting with a brush with a slight amount of water in it will help the paint flow off your brush. I recommend dipping your brush into water or dipping your brush into your wet palette before into your paint. The last thing to note is that when you lift your brush off a model, it has a tendency to leave a dollop of paint behind. This can be easily feathered out, but keep this in mind when you are blending colors. The first area I paint are the eyes, as they are the most difficult part. This way, if I mess up on the eyes and need to strip and start again, I won't lose any other progress. I created an ultimate guide to eyes video, which will be available here, but I'll quickly go over how I painted these eyes in this video. I began by painting her eyes an off-white, not worrying about staying in the lines. Then I cut out the eye shape with a deep red. Be sure you do both eyes concurrently so they match. Next, I take a Prisma 005 marker and dot in the pupils and iris. After it's dry, I go back in and add white highlight to the upper right corner. I messed up in both of these eyes and had to go back in with a black paintbrush to fix the pupil iris, but everyone makes mistakes. Okay, now that the boring part is over, let's go on to the rest of the face. My character has a very pink complexion, so I'm using White Sands, Ishtar Pink, and Brown Leather. I placed all the colors on my wet palette and gave them a preliminary thinning with my thinner glaze mix. Then I mixed them together to create a gradient from one color to the next. Then, following this diagram, I apply paint to her face. I will be placing the paint exactly where it belongs instead of painting the entire face one color and then layering on top of it because I have this handy map. The brightest points of the face will be the tip of the nose, the chin, and the cheekbones. The darker points of the face will be the hollows of the cheeks, under the nose, and under the lip. Another place to add shadows would be the sides of the nose and the flat of the nose between the eyebrows. The darkest point will be directly under the chin. I'm applying a 50-50 mix of my pink and cream mixture to under her eyes cheek area first, carefully sculpting up towards the eye the same way I cut out the white of the eye with my dark eyeliner. This is going to act as my lighter midtone. Then I'm applying my contour shade, a mix of 50-50 brown and pink, to the hollows of the cheek and side of the nose. Next, I'm creating a glaze to blend these two colors together. I'm adding more pink to my 50-50 cream pink mixture and thinning it down with a glaze medium from Vallejo. A glaze is thinner consistency of paint that is applied in several layers. Glazes can be used to slightly alter a color or blend two colors together. For blending, the idea is that this in-between color blurs the lines between your two disparate colors. I apply the glaze and, if need be, feather it out with a damp brush to avoid harsh transitions. You have a window of a few seconds before your paint begins to dry, so either work quickly or wait for it to dry completely. I may need to apply several layers of glazing till I reach a smooth gradation. And while I have this pink on my palette, I'm going to go ahead and apply it to the hair. Then I'm pushing my highlights even further by glazing with a diluted cream. Be sure to paint the eyebrows and leave some skin texture between the eyes and the eyebrows. Next, I'm painting the mouth. Paint the inside of the mouth first with black or dark red, then paint the lips a rosy color. If you want to be even more advanced, you can glaze and blush with the same pink color. Remember to start slowly and apply your glaze in thin layers till you have built up the color you are happy with. I'm painting in a circular motion inwards so that my last dollop of paint will be in the center, where it would naturally be more intense. Next, I'm taking black and painting in any shadows that are going to be difficult to reach. We want to paint from the back forward, so I'm painting in the furthest back or the darkest areas first. At this point, I have realized that there are some mold lines on her face that I missed. Luckily for me, my character has scars on her face, so I'm going to take a darker rosy color and paint along those mold lines to create scars. Then I'm adding a highlight to the top of the scars and a grayed shadow underneath, so it looks like a raised section of skin. I'm now going to give a base coat to the rest of my model. The jacket is done with Boreal Green from scale 75, and the boots and pants are done with black and gray from Reaper. A lighter gray for the pants and darker for the boots. I always base my miniatures in my mid-tone color first. That way I can layer up and down with ease. Then I'm quickly painting in the base and a shadow. Now it's finally time for the fun. I'm going to be using complementary colors to create color contrast in the shadows. Hi! I'm going to be using complementary colors in the shadows to create interest and color contrast. Complementary colors are the colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. When placed next to each other, they are pleasing to the eyes because they activate the rods and cones in our eyes. When using complementary colors, you don't have to use the exact opposite. Something approximate will be good enough. On this model, I'm going to be using this deep purplish red, and I'm only going to be using this one color in my shadows across the miniature to help tie my model together. I'm going to be doing a combination of layering and wet blending. I'm starting with wet blending, but if wet blending isn't your thing, hold tight and I'm going to be doing layering next. The key to wet blending is to work quickly and cleaning your brush in between each interaction. Apply your shadow color, clean brush. Apply your second color, blend, clean brush. Blend together with a damp brush. Wet blending is not as scary as you think, I promise. It also works best in smaller sections and with similarly toned colors. If you found that the colors aren't as opaque as you would like, and you can very clearly see the blending brush strokes, you can apply a second layer of wet blending to help better hide that gradation. I'm starting by placing my colors onto the wet palette, mixing together the light green and dark green, as well as my dark green and purple. To wet blend, I'm going to apply my shadow colors, and while the paint is still wet, blend out the edges with my base color. I'm adding shadows under her arms, under her bust, and under her hair on the back of the miniature. For the front of her jacket, I'm going to be doing layering. I'm using this greenish blue and mixing it with my boreal green, creating transitionary colors all the way up to my brightest point. I'm then going to build up my highlights. Imagine layering like building a pyramid, where each layer is brighter or darker and is built upon the previous layer and is a smaller version than the layer below it. Highlights are being added atop the bust, on her shoulders, and the top of her arms. Again, consider what areas would be lit by remembering where your light is coming from. When in doubt, imagine your eyes are your light source and hold your miniature so your eyes would shine where the light would be hitting your model. Any areas that you can see should be lit. When doing layering, you'll want to blend out the steps by doing glazing over top. Remember to let each layer of paint fully dry before applying another layer. Otherwise, you could accidentally pull up damp paint and create texture. For the pants, I'm working with a different type of layering. I'm going to apply my highlights to the front of the leg roughly, allowing my uneven paint strokes to show through. Then I'm going back in with my original base color, pulling my paint away from the highlight. Since less paint is left at the beginning of my paint stroke, I am essentially blending these colors together. In this way, I'm going to work my way around the figure. I'm doing this technique on the pants specifically because pants are usually a coarser material, so I think visible brush strokes works just fine. When I first did her accessories, I painted them all black, but it was starting to become pretty dull. For the bag, I'm mixing a shade of reddish brown and my shadow color. For my highlights, I'm going to lighten this color with my peach and cream. By using the peach, cream, and purple, I'm integrating this element into my model so it looks more cohesive. I'm then going to highlight on the top of the purse strap, as well as the side of the bag that is visible from beneath her arm. Next is washes. I took a black wash from Citadel and applied it to her bag. You want to do washes in areas where there is a lot of sunken detail. Washes can pool and leave what are called coffee stains on large open areas, so stick to using washes where they will be most effective by applying them to areas with a lot of texture. Washes come in a variety of colors and they tint whatever paint you're placing them on top of, so consider what wash mix you'll want to use carefully. Contrast paints are a mix of a normal paint and a wash, and they are produced by Citadel. I don't use contrast paints very much because they don't give me the amount of control I desire. My favorite colors of contrast paint are the brown tones, as I use them frequently on boots and bags. These small details are often heavily textured, so the contrast paint works to quicken my painting process of these areas. Now I thought I was on to completing the jacket. I was wrong, but I didn't know that, so I took gray and painted in the studs, adding a darker shadow underneath. Of course, this was done in the wrong order, and I should have done the shadow and then the gray stud, but it was fine in the end. Then I'm adding a bright white highlight on top of the studs. The hair was a bit tricky. I had previously painted it pink, then using the side of my brush, I add more intense highlights in areas that are directly facing the light, layering brighter and brighter until I get to an intense white. And here you can see that I'm going back in to add my purplish shadows. I should have painted my shadows first, but lastly, I add lining to her hair in the same shadowy color. Dry brushing and edge highlighting are both techniques used to paint the raised areas of a miniature, like you just saw in the hair. In general, dry brushing is a fast and messy technique done on large areas with a flat brush, while edge highlighting is a far more controlled variation done with the side of a round brush. On this model, I'm using edge highlighting to paint only the raised areas, like her hair, the details on her bags, bracers, and boots. For edge highlighting, load your brush with slightly thicker paint. Carefully paint the raised areas with the side of your paintbrush. You don't want to press too hard or use paint that's too liquidy. Otherwise, you might accidentally flood those detailed areas. You want to paint those edges ever so delicately. You also work in the same layering style with edge highlighting, building up your highlights by dry brushing with a brighter color in a smaller and smaller area. The most popular places edge highlighting is used are the sharp angles of armor and weapons. Dry brushing is also done with thicker paint. Place your flat brush into the paint and wipe away the majority of the paint on a paper towel off to the side. Then quickly pull your brush back and forth over the raised areas you wish to paint. To help each element of my miniature pop, I'm going to be doing lining. Imagine lining like adding shadows to areas that otherwise would be too small to paint. I usually choose a darker color of whatever color I'm lining with, but you could also use black. On this model, I'm using the same dark purple. Lining is a very delicate process and can be a bit dangerous. Have good posture, hold your breath, and paint confidently. You might ask what things I line, and the answer is everything. If it would cast a shadow or help add definition, line it. If you mess up and your lining got out of control, you can paint back over it. If the paint doesn't seem like it's covering your dark lining color, mix your color with white. The particles that make up white paint are larger than other colors. Therefore, it has better coverage. Adding a little bit of white to your paint will increase the opacity. After you've covered your mistake with your lighter paint, go ahead and paint back over with your original color. And now we are on to the final step, and that is intensifying your miniature with inks. If you don't have inks, that is totally fine, but they are definitely a fun paint to have. Inks are dyes suspended in a translucent liquid, and thusly are more intense in color. Inks can have different degrees of coverage, so double check what you're buying, or thin it down with thinner medium before applying it to your model. Since inks are translucent, that means that you can still see the color underneath. On this miniature, I decided that there wasn't enough contrast on her jacket. So I took this white ink as well as a blue and green ink from Scale 75's Intensity set and mixed them together. I thinned down my ink mixture with Glaze Thinner Medium, as the mixture can be very strong. I apply several layers, mixing more and more white until I get to a highlight I am happy with. Obviously, I went a little overboard and have to redo the studs, but oh well. For the shadows, I am adding an even thinner mixture of purple inks to even more intensify the color contrast. Congratulations! You are almost done with your model. The last thing to do is add any matte or gloss medium and seal your miniature. Mochi! A varnish is a clear coat that you can apply to your model for a variety of reasons. First, it could be to protect your model, or it could be to change the consistency of your paint. I, for example, prefer my models to be matte. Some paints, including contrast paints and washes, leave a glossy finish to your model. I counteract this by painting over those glossy areas with a matte varnish. On the other hand, perhaps you want an area to be shiny. You can apply a gloss varnish to achieve your desired effect. Come here. I always seal my models. I always seal my models with Tester's Dull Coat. Tester's Dull Coat will keep your model from chipping or peeling over time. I prefer Tester's Dull Coat because it doesn't interact with whatever varnish I might have applied to my model previously. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope that it was useful and helpful to you. Let me know down below. Did you learn anything? Do you feel more confident? Do you feel like I have taken you from beginner to advanced as promised? If you like what I do here, you can support this channel in a few ways. First, you can buy any of the tools that I recommend or that I use from the links down in my description box below, and I'll make a little bit of money. It doesn't cost you anything extra, it's just a little bit for me. Second, you can join me on Patreon, where I have a Discord server. You can get access to videos early, get feedback, as well as join my growing community. Oh, you are a little nightmare today. Hi. Oh my God. Lastly, you can subscribe here on YouTube, click the bell to get notified when I upload a video, or follow me on Instagram. I love hearing from you. Please comment here or on Instagram, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.